This video is long overdue, and this is a video in which we talk about Eustace Kidd. I think the true rival of Luffy, of course, outside of Blackbeard, the only person amongst the Supernova, because the Supernova and Worst Generation, those are different factions, a lot of similar people, but a significant difference. The only person out of the Supernova who seems to have an ongoing rivalry, it seems a lot more credible than the one he has with Law, seemingly with Law. I think before Punk Hazard, or probably before Dressrosa, there was some merit to it. That is gone now. But again, we're focused on Eustace Kidd. For the most part, Kidd doesn't have a great reputation in the One Piece community, or just in general. I think a lot of fans look at things that's happened to Kidd and they say, well, he's taken a lot of L's, useless Captain Kidd. He just hasn't done anything in comparison to Luffy to garner the respect that we have for Luffy, or even the attention. So therefore, why even pay attention to Eustace Captain Kidd? For the most part, he's been a minor character in the series based on appearances and just impact overall. So then why are people even championing Eustace Captain Kidd? Why is he even relevant? Well, I think with Captain Kidd, there's a lot we're going to see from him. Outside of story elements, Oda himself has commented on Captain Kidd and said that Law and the things he had planned for Law, he's far exceeded them. All the things that happened to Law was not part of the plan. Eustace Captain Kidd, though, Oda had a significant role for him post-time skip, or in the story in general. So based on what we've seen from Law, I expect at least that from Captain Kidd. And granted, we haven't seen that yet, but again, there's still a lot of time left for Kidd to be fleshed out. But just because we haven't seen a lot of Kidd doesn't mean we don't know anything about Kidd. Oda has strategically showed Kidd at key moments in time in the One Piece verse. But before we get to that, let's talk about Kidd's introduction. From an outside perspective, it seems like Kidd is an asshole, the barbarian, just about carnage and destruction, doesn't really care about anything. But there's dialogue here that shows or gives some meaning to the reason why Kidd operates the way he does. We saw Kidd comment on the Celestial Dragons and what they represent in the world, and based off of how they are, the things that they indirectly create. And I believe Kidd is saying that he himself, he's one of the indirect creations of this society ruled by the Celestial Dragons. Now granted, while the surface level view again of Kidd may be just one of an annoying archetype, because I've heard people say that they don't enjoy the type of character that Kidd is, but I think there's some depth to Kidd's character that Oda will flesh out, or should flesh out, in Wano and post Wano. But in chapter 500, Kidd talks about the Celestial Dragons. He says, compared to the mighty and their simple pure hearts, the world's villains are much more humane. And again, here in this quote, pure hearts, that's in quotations, in which he's making fun of or being sarcastic about the mighty and their pure hearts, in which it's going back to society, or the One Piece society, in which strength rules, and the pure heart that the mighty, or the people on top, that they present, that's all a facade. Because again, just because you're mighty doesn't mean you're good, but because you're mighty, that puts you in charge, that puts you in power. So for Kidd, he sees through the world government and what they put out there as far as like their form of justice, and he understands that they're only in the position they're in because they're mighty. But again, just because you're in charge doesn't make you pure. You have your own ideals and things you believe in, but that doesn't necessarily make it right. So I think just in this small quote, it's a lot we can expound upon, and I think it's overlooked. So that's why I wanted to touch on it, because I think it's very profound when you take a second to just think about it. The quote about the world's villains being much more humane, I think that goes back to just expectations. And again, for villains, there's an expectation of them. So for them and the things they do, it's expected. Kidd also goes on to say scum rule the world and give birth to more scum. Don't they know that? We may mean to do harm, but we're sort of cute by comparison, aren't we, Killer? Again, that goes back to what I said previously about Kidd knowing who he is and knowing what he represents, knowing what he's set out to do, but he owns that. But again, he's saying that he's created by the scum that rules the world, which is the Celestial Dragons, which again gives some more insight into his past, which I think is a derivative of somewhat a hint as to what happened to Kidd and Killer in the past. Whereas something the Celestial Dragons did birth this form of Kidd, or these characters who are Kidd and Killer. We probably will get more about that in the future, but I think it's so many things that we can look into, which tells us a story without saying much. But Kidd here doubles down and says, if we see someone interesting, maybe we should buy him, and laughs, because again, this society is derived by the actions of the Celestial Dragons. It's almost poetic carnage, in which we have the world government, we have the Celestial Dragons. Celestial Dragons, they're creating most of the carnage based on their actions and just going down the totem pole. The world government is in the middle, trying to appear as if they're trying to solve all of these issues. And then we have the pirates and the bounty hunters and people below them who are copying the people at the top by not even remotely close to as bad as them as far as, again, being humane, because they have slaves, they kill whoever they want to kill. But then the Marines punish those people, but also report to the celestial dragons. It's a weird dynamic. That's why the One Piece world is just so out of sorts, because everything is almost doomed for failure. But again, a conversation for another day. It's also interesting that for Kidd, based on what we know, goes back to his introduction, where Shaki talks about, Kidd having the highest bounty and about him killing people. And a lot of people use that and say, well, Kidd has a high bounty because he kills people, where I think is a difference here, in which he had a higher bounty than Luffy because he killed people. But it's obvious he has a high bounty because he's strong. Kidd also cares about information, in which every key moment from the Punk Hazard, the post Marineford, Kidd is watching and taking in information. Even if he doesn't really care about the topic too much, he wants to know more to understand how to move. But for people that go back to the L's that Kidd has taken and they try to define his character based on those L's, but I think, an L you take could lead to greater growth, because we've seen that happen with Luffy. And Luffy, from all the L's he's taken, he's grown a lot from it. So for Kidd, I don't know why people don't expect the same thing. I mean, the main difference people say as far as strength is concerned between Luffy and Kidd is that, well, Luffy went and he trained for 2 years to master the things that he didn't know well or didn't do well. And so therefore he should be a lot stronger than Kidd, who just went into the new world and got bodied over and over and over again. I think there's some truth to that, but I don't want to go too far into that conversation, but I'll say this. Just because you go to college for 2 years doesn't mean you'll be better than someone who went straight to the NBA and had 2 years playing against better competition. The person who was training him was not even the most ideal for that situation. And this isn't to doubt Rayleigh as a trainer. I just feel like for Luffy as a combatant, of course, hockey is something you wanted to get better at, but the main drawback for Luffy at this point is Gear 4th. And a lot of things had to go right for Gear 4th to work for Luffy in the New World. So things could have gone as bad as Kidd or even worse for Luffy, even though he went and he got that training for 2 years. But again, this isn't about Luffy, so we'll talk about Luffy, Law, and Kidd in one video at some point. But for right now, I think Kidd should be respected as much as Luffy. And the reason is Kidd has had an interaction directly or indirectly with every Yonko except for Blackbeard. It's obvious that Kidd is meant to be the antithesis of what Luffy is. Granted, they have similar goals and dreams, in which Kidd, he wants to become Pirate King as well. But for Luffy's goal and his drive, it goes back to him being free. I don't think being free is a complete thought, or it doesn't really make sense in the One Piece world, because being free, there's a lot that comes with it that I don't think Luffy understands yet. However, again, conversation for another day. But for Kidd, it seems like he's driven by what happened to him in the past. And so therefore, even when he got to the New World and pirates were running back from the New World, he was questioning their resolve, saying, why did you come here? This is what is expected. So for Kidd, I don't think he regrets going against Shanks and getting his arm taken off or getting bodied by Kaido. I think he regrets that alliance because he didn't want that alliance in the first place. But I think for him, he understands like the outcome of experiences and getting stronger. In all these situations where Luffy comes out on top, he figures it out. Kidd gets the short end of the stick, in which the alliance, Luffy got Law, and it somehow worked out in Dressrosa because they happened upon people there that could help them. Kidd doesn't have the power that Luffy has to draw people to him. Again, of course, he's charismatic in his own way because he is a King's Conqueror's Haki user, but he doesn't have that special power. I mean, of course, in One Piece it's called a special power. In the real world, we call that the MC effect. Plot protection, right? But that's not to say Kidd doesn't have plot protection of his own, because he could have been killed by Shanks' crew. However, it's not nearly to the level of what Luffy has experienced. Luffy could have died several times in the New World and still been arrested and locked up by Big Mom. But of course, things play out differently for the main characters, so don't mean to compare them on that. But for Kidd and everything he's gone through, again, going up against Shanks, getting his arm taken in the New World, going to Big Mom's territory, wounding a commander and taking what he needed, which means he probably got a poneglyph. That's what I'm assuming he got from Big Mom. Being a King's Haki user, going against Kaido even after Apu set him up, and Hawkins, he backed down. Him and Killer apparently did not back down. They went after a Yonko at that time. Of course, he lost to Kaido, but that didn't stop his resolve, because we saw it in Udon, in which he was still competing against Luffy, and albeit with one arm. Kidd also broke out of Udon when Luffy was stuck there, and of course he had his crew taken away from him, and Killer being reduced to a crackhead, and these things just doesn't happen to Luffy. So this may lead to some growth, I think, for Kidd, but it's never been shown that he doesn't care about his crewmates. So I think it's added drive for him to defeat Kaido. For him and Luffy, I don't think he's given up anything when they've been shown on screen. They've been portrayed as equals, or Kidd, sometimes he's had this slight edge. Going back to Sabaody, when Luffy used Gear 3rd, he turned into a Kidd, where Kidd, he didn't have any drawback. And then in 975, when they both attacked the ship, or all three, but we're excluding Law here, you could use it as a comparison to Gear 4th, saying Punk Rotten, that could be on Gear 4th's level, but we don't know if it's a form or an attack. I believe it's a form in which once he goes into Punk Rotten, his attacks are amplified, because something for Kidd, he can repel and attract. So for Kuma, I was thinking about Ursa Shock, in which he compresses so much air for a long time. It's just an unbelievable attack. What if Kidd has an attack in which he can repel and attract in one go, in which it creates a shockwave or a bomb of sorts, in which that force pulling and pulling, basically catching an opponent in between those two forces, that could be pretty devastating. And I think Kidd uses the repel and attraction to his advantage when he's in Punk Rotten as well, because in some ways he repelled or attracted himself to the ship, repelling himself from the ground, using his body to the ship. So it's a weird power. We don't even know what his Devil Fruit is, but obviously it's some electromagnetism involved. I expect great things from Kidd. Character-wise, when you go deeper, it's a lot more to him, but notoriety is important, being strong is important, protecting his crew is important. So for the people that, you know, are discounting his character, discounting him early, I would say this: let's give it till the end of Wano. If Kidd doesn't do something significant here, or gets to the level as far as bounty is concerned to Luffy, then we can move off of that. But guys, give me your thoughts. How do you feel about Kidd overall? Do you think he's on Luffy's level at all? Do you think Luffy would destroy him in a fight? What about his notoriety and just overall perception? Give me your thoughts. Make sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel for more content like this. Follow me on Twitter at BroggoDAce. Follow me on Instagram at BroggoD.Ace. Follow me on Twitch.tv/BroggoDAce. Thank you to my patrons. I appreciate you guys so much. Like and subscribe. I'll catch you in the next one. Peace.